Today I wanted to talk a little bit more about why I'm so interested in the health of our pelvis and why I've posted a few videos about the pelvic floor, muscles, and the anatomy of the pelvis. And so I'll talk about why it's important for us to inquire about our own pelvic floor muscles and our pelvis. And then after I give you a little context, a little background about why it's important, then we'll go into learning how to do a variation of child's pose in order to release pelvic floor muscles. Not everyone has tight pelvic floor muscles, but we want to release a muscle before we can then strengthen it. People often think that we have to have strong pelvic floor muscles, right? Like we're doing Kegels all the time as women. We're told to do Kegels all the time, but that's not necessarily true because some women have tight pelvic floor muscles. So not everyone does, but some people do. And there is a continuum as well. So there's healthy pelvic floor muscles, and then there are tight pelvic floor muscles. I'll get a little bit into what that means. And there are lax pelvic floor muscles. So this continuum, we want healthy pelvic floor muscles, but most of the time we're in between somewhere being very tight or very lax. And we can be, if it makes it more complicated, if it could be any more complicated, it is, because we can have actually both at the same time. So we can have a tight pelvic floor muscle on one side of our pelvis and a lax pelvic floor muscle on the other side. So how do we get there? How do we get here? How did we get here? How did we get to our pelvic floor muscles being either clenched or relaxed? So we oftentimes sit in ways, like I've discussed in past videos, that affect the health of our pelvic floor muscles. So I've talked about sitting on the tailbone rather than the sits bones and how that posture affects our pelvic floor muscles. But I also want to talk to you today about if you are a woman, if you grew up identifying as a woman, then you probably tend to cross your legs when you're sitting in a chair, right? So this creates asymmetries in our pelvic floor muscles. So I tend to cross my leg using my right leg on top more. And after doing pelvic inquiry, breath work, different poses to bring awareness to my pelvis, I've discovered that on my right side is much tighter than my left side. So of course, it's not only one thing that's going to cause these muscles to be either tight or lax, right? It's going to be a multitude of different things. So it's just inquiring about our pelvis and noticing our habits is just one way that we can be more conscious of what's going on down here physically, so that we can take one more step towards greater pelvic health. So yes, we have either tight pelvic floor muscles or lax. So if we have really tight pelvic floor muscles, that means that it's very hard for them to unclench, right? Think of the hand. It's like making a fist and it's very hard to unclench and let go, kind of surrender there, right? You're holding on to something. If we have really lax pelvic floor muscles, then they're often like a hand that can't grasp something, right? They can't engage fully when we want them to engage. So these are the two differences that might be present in your own pelvic floor, or maybe they're not. Maybe you have a healthy pelvic floor. But the only way you can really get to know that is by doing different inquiries, like breath work, really starting to pay attention to where the breath is going in the body, where it's easier on one side, or maybe feeling more spacious and open, and maybe where it's more constricted on another side. And as time goes on, I'll release some more videos as to how you can inquire more about what's going on in your own pelvis. So yes, to have a healthy muscle, any muscle, has to have a full range of motion and mobility. So that means the ability to, yes, constrict, but also to relax and release. So if our pelvic floor muscles are constantly constricting, that's not a healthy pelvic floor muscle, right? If our pelvic floor muscles are constantly lax and not engaged, then that's not going to be a healthy muscle. So this is why we're discussing pelvic health and how we can change that. Another way that our pelvic floor muscles can either become too tight or affected is by wearing very tight pants or clothing that constricts the pelvic floor muscles and also sometimes can even pinch nerves as well in the pelvic floor, cutting off some feeling there. So just be mindful of what you're putting on your body, really treating your body as if it were a temple. It's your vessel for who you are. So really treating it with respect. And another interesting point about our pelvic area, our pelvic bowl, our pelvic muscles, is that we tend to harbor energetically emotions, traumas, past negative experiences here in these muscles. So we say in yoga, in the chakra system, the first chakra, which is located in our pelvic floor, this chakra is all about stability, safety, having your basic needs met, and feeling that comfort, and we can't reach through this chakra system to enlightenment unless that basic foundation is set, right? So with that, we also physically hold onto things and clench here in these muscles because of stress, because of trauma, because of negative experiences. And that can be physical trauma or emotional trauma or both, any type of trauma here. We hold on to in those pelvic floor muscles. And that's all connected back to our spinal cord, really, and also the psoas muscle is connected. It connects the upper body and lower body. It's one of the only muscles that does that, and it goes through the pelvic floor. So when that muscle tightens because it wants to protect you, right? It's going into fight or flight mode or freeze mode in order to protect. So it's clenching up. When the psoas muscle does that, it also tells those pelvic floor muscles to clench as well. So then, as time goes on, maybe we don't learn after that to release those muscles. So we're constantly walking around with these muscles in our pelvic bowl that are holding on, that are bracing for something to happen because it's simply our body's in survival mode. So ways in which we can help our pelvic floor relax and release is becoming aware of those muscles, right? Becoming aware of this area. And there's another exercise, I should say, that you can do even if we're ever back at work, right? Or if you're walking on the street or really anywhere, if you're feeling nervous, if your heartbeat is rising, if you're feeling like your fight or flight is starting to turn on, you want to protect yourself, simply, and there's not a threat around, of course, then simply relax your mouth, relax through the jaw, relax the tongue in the jaw. Just notice what your jaw is doing when you're feeling nervous or when you're feeling anxious or when you feel like you're being threatened. Notice what your jaw is doing. More often than not, your jaw will be clenched. Your tongue will be narrow and hard inside the mouth. And this tongue, actually, the muscle of the tongue, is related to the pelvic floor muscles. So there's a line of fascia or muscle that runs from the tongue down through the body into the pelvic floor. So when your mouth is clenched, when your tongue is in this hardened, clenched state, then your pelvic floor muscles tend to clench. They tend to constrict. They tend to tighten. So simply by allowing your jaw to unclench, actively widening through the tongue, allowing it to get heavy in the mouth, and taking full belly breaths in. So breathing in as you expand the belly and it goes up and out, and then breathing out, emptying it out as the belly comes back in towards the back body. That will help to not only release through these pelvic floor muscles, will also help your psoas muscle, which I discussed a little bit before, to also send signals to your brain to calm down, to turn on your parasympathetic nervous system, which is your rest and digest, and turn that fight or flight off. So that's just one tiny way that I hope serves you and that you can put to good practice. And it's just one way to be more aware of what is going on in our body, right? And kind of embodying our body even more. So with that, we'll get into our child's pose variation. This variation is going to be done with so many props, but not to worry, you can find these props in your house. And we're using a lot of props today so that we can release through the tailbone. So I'll show you why, because oftentimes in our child's pose in our normal yoga classes, we're cued to bring the knees wide, big toes touch, right? And so with that, I actually curl my tailbone under my body. So it's being pulled under my body. And so then we're really not releasing those muscles. They're actually shortening and constricting. So I'll show you what I mean without the props first, and then I'll tell you which props to gather, okay? So I'll just move my props off to the side for a moment so I can show you the really round shell that we create. And there's nothing wrong with it, right? But if we're trying to really actively release our pelvic floor muscles, if we know that we have some tightness, or perhaps we just have an inclination that there might be some tightness in the pelvic floor area, then we want to be actively releasing as much as we can, right? So there's nothing wrong with doing your child's pose in this way, but we're just doing it for pelvic floor reasons. So yeah, the way that I'm describing in normal classes is knees wide, big toes touch, and you come all the way down, forehead to the mat. And so from here you can see that my low back, my sacrum, my lumbar spine is really rounded, and it's being pulled under my sits bones and down. And with that, when the tailbone is pulling under, remember I said that the pelvic floor muscles are shortening and they're constricting, okay? So that means they're not releasing and they're not relaxing, right? That means they're still holding on. So this is why we're going to do this variation. So you're going to need 2 blocks, okay? Or something like 2 thick books, okay, about the same size. Those will go at the top of our mat. And then we're going to have a bolster. So if you don't have a bolster, you can use a very firm couch cushion. And if you still don't think that's enough, then maybe you need 2 firm couch cushions. I have a very thin bolster here as the foundation, but it is firm. So I'm going to just put another rectangular firm pillow on top to get a little more height, okay? And then I'm also going to use a blanket and then another blanket. So the blanket here, I folded it in half and now I'm folding it again. So it's this long rectangle, okay? And then for this thin blanket, you can kind of fold it however, because it's gonna go under your head. So I folded it into a small rectangle. So we won't use those just yet. I'll get into the pose and then see if I need them. Okay, so bring your knees on the outside, or on the outside of your bolster, okay? And we're going to hug the knees on the bolster. So you don't need to squeeze it. We don't want to actively engage our inner thighs right now. We just want to hug the bolster. Keep your big toes about 1 or 2 inches apart. And then from here, you can begin to lower your belly onto the bolster and release through the forehead. So my hands are on the blocks, my head is on the bolster, and yeah, my low back is looking like, the sacrum's looking like it's tilting up a bit more here, which means I'm getting a little more of a release in the sits bones, and the sits bones are spreading, which means that the pelvic floor muscles are lengthening. But I want to get a little bit more of a lift so they can lengthen, those muscles can lengthen even more. So I'm going to put this long blanket, I made it into the long rectangle, underneath my sits bones and on top of the ankles. And I'm going to bring my little pillow here because I think I need a little more lift in the head too, on top, okay? Just making it really comfy, really accessible here. And then you can begin to lower yourself down, maybe moving the forehead onto the bolster. And as you can see, now my tailbone is tilted up a bit more. My sits bones are spreading apart, meaning that those pelvic floor muscles are lengthening, relaxing, releasing. And my natural curves in my spine are being supported. So I recommend staying here for 5 minutes. And if your arms get a little tired, as they might because they're pretty active on the blocks, you can shift the blocks back so that they're under your elbows, or the books, so that they're under your elbows. And the hands can rest onto the mat, head onto the bolster. Yeah, at least 5 minutes here, but you might even want to stay longer. And just breathe into the belly. Feel the belly expanding, touching the bolster. And then empty the belly as it comes back in. So when we're like this, when we're on our front body, in this position, it's so much easier to breathe into the pelvis, to breathe down into the pelvis. As we inhale, we fill the low belly with air, all the way down into those pelvic floor muscles. And then we exhale as the edges of our bodies come back in. We'll do one more breath with you here, filling up with air, imagining the air going down into those pubic bones, the pubic bone down into the sitting bones. And then breathing out, contracting everything in. Good. And yeah, stay here as long as you need. And when you're ready, you can use your hands to come back up. And that's one way in which you can release those muscles. So I'll be adding some more videos as time goes on different ways that you can release your muscles if you have tight pelvic floor muscles or hypertonic pelvic floor muscles. And I'll also add some videos as time goes on how to strengthen muscles in the pelvic floor if you have some lax pelvic floor muscles or some hypotonic pelvic floor muscles. Thank you so much, and I hope that this served you. And if you have any questions or you'd like to connect with me in any way about anything that we did in the video or I talked about, I know I went on a few tangents, but I just love talking about this. So if you'd like to reach out, please, I'd be more than happy to talk with you. Thank you. Namaste.